Hello, everyone. This is Carly here with the Blue Dove Foundation. Hope you're doing well. We'll begin in just a minute. Hello, hello. So excited that you're here with us, and we're going to be beginning in just a moment here, talking about you're in a relationship now what as we celebrate Tu B'Av today. Hello.
Hello.
Hey there.
Hi, Darrah. How are you?
Good. How are you doing?
Doing really well, thank you. So excited to be here with you today. And for those of you watching live, it's great to have you with us. For those of you watching later, we're so glad you could tune in. My name is Carly, and I am the Director of Education and Programming at the Blue Dove Foundation, which is an organization that focuses on education, outreach, and awareness for mental health through a Jewish lens. And today we're celebrating the Jewish holiday of Tu B'Av, which is the holiday of love. It's a nice little way to close out the summertime. And it's a day where we are celebrating relationships that we cherish and appreciating the love that we share with others. And so we're going to learn a little bit about Tu B'Av. And then, Darrah, I have so many questions for you. So we'll jump into those. But quickly about Tu B'Av. So Tu B'Av, we're learning about, what is our relationship with other people. And in Genesis, we see the story of the creation of Adam and Eve. And the general lesson is that it's unhealthy for people to be alone, that we as individuals are meant to find connections with others. So before Eve appears, Adam is promised this ezer kenegdo from God, this counterpart, this helpmate that's intended to be a support. And Adam doesn't just simply receive a helpmate. A kenegdo is really someone that stands before and opposite one another. So what we're learning is that your ideal partner it's not just a yes person. It's not just a cheerleader. It's someone that can really respond and critique. It's someone that can be a collaborative and equal part of the relationship. And we engage in so many relationships in our lives. We've got romantic relationships, friendships, business partnerships, anywhere in between. And so we know that with mental health challenges, sometimes that can get in the way of us genuinely being close to those around us. It can prevent us from having healthy conflict resolution. It can make it challenging to feel safe in relationships. And so we think it's really imperative that we learn about how to address those concerns in constructive and thoughtful ways. And we're going to dive into some ways that we can do that today. So, Darrah, I'd love to invite you to introduce yourself.
Well, in the context of this, we are going to be talking about a relationship check-in that my partner and I have used since early on in our relationship. But in general, I am a hybrid life and business coach, and my entire philosophy centers around first designing your life and defining success for yourself, then building a business or career to fund it and create the time freedom that you need to actually live that life, and then build the network to support it and open the doors that you need for success on your terms. And I'm glad that you pulled out that piece that relationships take many forms, and the skills that we learn in one arena can be well applied to others.
Yeah, I think that's true. I think sometimes we compartmentalize our relationships, but really a relationship is a relationship. Um, So I have many questions for you. And the first is, where did you first get this idea of monthly check-ins? Was there something that happened that inspired this?
Yeah, so to set the context, 6 months into my relationship with my partner, Brendan, we decided to start doing these monthly check-ins. We were already celebrating our month anniversaries, just sort of marking them, maybe doing something together, just making it a nice thing to celebrate. Rather than feeling like we had to wait till some large milestone hit, I think it's so easy to pass through life and think the things that are worth celebrating are so far in the distance.
Yeah.
And we were sitting with some friends, Kat and Daly, who had met at the same place that we had met at a group called Breakout exactly a year before. Daly was in New York and Kat was in Atlanta. And Brendan, when we met a year later at the same place, was in New York and I was in Atlanta. Daly moved to Atlanta to be with Kat. Brendan moved to Atlanta to be with me. Very parallel thing. And we were sitting with them and they both, like Brendan and I, are in the business world. And they said, you know, we adapted this exercise from YPO, which is Young Presidents Organization. And it's been a really applicable thing for us in our relationship. You guys should give it a try. So they lent us their questions and then we sort of put our own spin on it. And I started sharing just with people in our world about these check-ins and about how informative they were to us. And it was very interesting to hear people's reactions. You'd get sort of the gamut from people saying, well, why would you wait 30 days to have a conversation with your partner? I was like, it's not the intention. Like, it's not that you ignore.
You should be talking in between.
Right. You don't ignore one another for 30 days. You don't push under the rug until the 30 days shows up. But what it really does at its core is creates an intentional space where you and your partner are both available for both a great conversation as well as what can sometimes be a difficult or a challenging conversation, because oftentimes, you know, everyone's lives are full and we aren't always in the headspace to have someone say, like, here's an area of growth that I see that I need in this relationship. And it's really nice when you're both in the mindset of, okay, this is coming and we're going to have this conversation.
It almost sounds like it gives you like a little bit of security to know, like, okay, like we're both walking in, we both know that we might hear some things that might be challenging. So like, let me prepare myself.
Right. And again, if it's like 2 days after a check-in, I'm not going to take a note and say 28 days from now I'm going to bring this up. Certainly that's not.
Yeah.
I do think that life moves so fast that oftentimes I'll be sitting and we both will review our calendar over the last month before we sit down. We'll go through our notes from last time of what came up so we can understand both, like, where were we, where are we now, but also because I tend to be forgetful and I'm like, what was it we did over the last days? And so it depends how your brain processes. My brain processes oftentimes in hindsight. So don't always recognize, like, oh, I felt this way in this time because we were just experiencing it and I wasn't processing it simultaneously. So that being the case, it does make it helpful. I'm like, I didn't even realize that I felt this way until we sat and really reflected and had that conversation.
Absolutely. I love that. And it sounds like you started doing this pretty early on, about 6 months into your relationship. So those questions that you had originally received from a friend, and then it sounds like you amended them. How did you do that? Did you have to agree on all the questions you were going to be answering? Did you sort of have it in draft form? What did that look and feel like?
We took their list and we basically looked at it at our first sit down. I remember we were driving up the Pacific Coast Highway. We live in Atlanta, but we were on a trip in California and we were sitting on one of the beautiful cliffs and we pulled the car over and we said, okay, today's our month anniversary. We've had an opportunity to do this. Let's give it a go. So we looked at Kat and Daly's list and we said, okay, which one of these feel like questions that are helpful to us or applicable, or let's just give them a try. And it wasn't we just did 9 questions and that was always the same. We definitely iterated over time to decide, does this feel useful? Does this feel in service to the relationship? Does it feel like there's actually a different question that might get us closer to what we actually want the heart of this question to be for? So we don't marry ourselves to any sort of structure outside of the intention to do it on a monthly basis. And then we really haven't changed the questions tremendously. I'd say one of the biggest things we did was just add it at the end to just throw in like a miscellaneous question. And we usually try to make it fun and light because sometimes it can be heavy, even if it's not serious. It's just like, you're remembering, you're digging, it feels like work. And so like, okay, let's bring something fun and light at the end.
That's awesome. I love that. And especially for brains that might not always like have everything organized or planned out. I'm sure having that miscellaneous almost category feels like a safe place to be like, oh, I forgot. I wanted to ask. So wonderful. Have you seen an increase or a change in your mental wellness or your partner's mental wellness because of this activity?
I've never tracked it that way, but I would say yes, just because I think ultimately when you feel safe to be fully transparent, fully vulnerable, fully held when you are sharing things with your partner, then that certainly creates a safe foundational place from which to go out into the world in every arena, not just in your primary relationship. And I think
Yeah.
it might be important to share some of the questions just so people are like, what are you even talking about?
Yeah.
So some of the questions that we ask each other each month are things like, what was something I did this month to make you feel loved, or they made you feel the most loved? And then conversely, what is something I could do to make you feel more loved? And then what's something about yourself, the other, and us that you're most proud over the last 30 days? What's your biggest hope, goal, or intention for yourself, the other, and both of us over the next 30 days? And that's just a few of them. But the point being that it's also not just about the unit, because we understand that the unit is comprised of the people who make it up. So that was something we added over time as well, because it was really helpful to just pause and be like, let's celebrate each other. And both like hearing from each other's words and giving ourselves a chance to have those wins and share them, but also to then mirror to each other like, hey, I was so proud when I saw you do this, and it really, I think, is commendable, and I hope that you saw that. And same with when it's the question of what has made me feel loved, because if you're familiar with the 5 love languages, it's, a global phenomenon. It's
Yeah.
interesting because we both went into a relationship having what we thought was clarity around what each of ours were. And we were lucky because ours were very aligned, since we didn't have to recalibrate too tremendously. However, when I go through these monthly check-ins, so many of the things that I tell Brendan are the things that made me feel loved. I'm like, wow, that's acts of service. And I always thought that was like super low on my list. And he's like, you constantly talk about these things. And it just was a helpful reminder that we evolve, and that in certain stages of life or certain times, like, we need different things. And it's so helpful for our partners. I certainly love when he tells me what makes him feel loved, because that gives me more motivation to keep doing it, which becomes a virtuous cycle.
I love that. And it also sounds like the questions are really rooted in sort of this like strengths-based approach where you're like really both helping to build each other up, even in the question of what can I do to make you feel more loved next month, or, in the next coming 30 days, it still has that intention of like, I know you can do this, and I know you've done this, and I appreciate what you do, especially in a world that sometimes just feels like it's, we're just like being told what we need to change or improve on. It does it in a really meaningful way, I think.
Yes. I mean, that really is the fundamental piece. If anyone's going to consider doing an exercise like this, please just take away that it's in service to the relationship. If, like, I've had people say to me, well, I've been married for 30 years and it would feel really challenging to enter in this conversation because there's so much we've swept under the rug for so long. Where I've never been married for 30 years, I can't speak to that feeling. However, my instinct says that it's better to start wherever you are than to just put it off altogether, and that it's not a dumping ground. It's not about, dumping all this stuff on your partner, making them feel badly. It's not about blame. It's in service to the relationship. So the way that we approach it isn't pointing a finger. It's not combative. It's meant to be, okay, if I actually need this thing, how can you receive hearing that? And that's not going to happen if I'm making you feel like a piece of shit.
Yeah, that makes sense. So, I mean, to sort of go to that point, like, what advice do you give to people who might feel intimidated or overwhelmed by doing a monthly check-in or something like that?
Well, one is we are not perfect. I'd say once pandemic hit, we totally fell off of our rhythm, which we had done so rhythmically for many years, because we felt like we're always around each other. Do we want to like other things? And I don't think that was the right choice, but I'm saying that to say, like, you don't have to be perfect and you can always pick it back up. So to feel like, oh, this is a huge commitment, you can just commit to trying and saying our intention is to do it monthly, but maybe we'll decide it's quarterly, or maybe we'll just, if we miss a month, we'll get back on the horse and do it again. And also to recognize that I've had a lot of people tell me they want to do this. I wrote about it for Forbes. And so I've had a lot of people write to me and say, I'm really interested in this, but my partner isn't. And that's tough because I think oftentimes the partner who isn't, what they've shared with me is that it's coming from this expectation of it's going to be bad news, or you're going to do something or say something that's not helpful or restorative to the relationship. So my suggestion would be to enter that space from a place of, hey, this is two-sided. It's not one-sided. I don't have a secret I'm holding from you. I'm not waiting to have some hard conversation. I really just think that this could be a action point for us that's really intentional, because I'm looking to connect with you more deeply. Like, you're my number one priority. And that doesn't mean that your partner's going to say yes, but it may just be, hey, starting with one question and talking about it over dinner, maybe making it less intimidating.
I like that. You can make it bite-sized. You can, no pun intended, doing it over dinner, but you can start small and maybe even build up a little bit. Connection is connection, no matter if it's one question or 9 questions. Have you ever used the questions for a check-in with a friend or a parent or anyone else?
I haven't, but I can imagine it would work well with a partner on the other side of the conversation who's just as invested. And like I said, Kat and Daly, who we took this from and rejiggered it for ourselves, they used it in a business context first. So, the questions can be amended to work for the context, but I think ultimately the foundation is the same principle, that when you're in any sort of relationship, having an intention to it that is growth oriented, that is connection minded, that is about being in service to all of the participants in that relationship is always a good thing. That, in business, I've run multiple businesses. I know how easy it is for wires to get crossed, for one communication to think one thing and another's to think or feel another. So it feels like a very natural thing to reorient this, relationship check-in that we think of in the sense of a romantic relationship, and take some version of that intention into any space where you want to strengthen the connection, the collaboration, the bond that you have.
Absolutely. I really love that. And I think especially in this world where, we've become more connected in a lot of ways since the beginning of the pandemic, but also we've become more disconnected. We're not working in the same offices. We're not, seeing each other in person. Finding ways to create intentional ways to connect and hear each other seems like it's just beneficial more than anything else.
Yeah, 100%. I think at the end of the day, I don't really drink, but if I did, my drinking word would be intention, because I think the why behind any action matters just as much, if not more, as the action itself. And one person's action could look identical to someone else's, but their intentions are different, which means that there's different outcomes, there's different weight that is carried to it. So if I had gone into one of these check-ins with my partner and my intention was to tear him down, it would be a very different outcome than my intention would go through the exact same motions.
Yeah, and we talk a lot about that at Blue Dove, is kavana, intention. What is the purpose behind us doing any of this? No matter what it is, and that intentionality means a lot and makes a difference. So the last question I want to ask you is, has anyone shared any stories with you of the monthly check-in process and what that has felt like for them, and if it's felt successful?
Yeah, many people have. One I'm thinking of, she and her husband had been together for years. They had 2 little kids. And I think, like many people with small children, they were still in love and they still wanted to be in a relationship, but their lives felt so oriented around work and family. And the wife in the couple told me how much this thing, which again is not attributed to us, this is, Kat and Daly and the know that they borrowed it from originally, that it really helped them, because she said, every month on a certain day, we planned a dinner date and we had a babysitter come over and we do this check-in. And, I will admit that oftentimes Brendan and I will go into it and we'll feel like, do we have to? We don't really want to do it. It feels like work. But I think like anything where you're willing to put in effort and you're willing to put in work, there's outcomes and dividends on the other side. And so exactly like my friend was saying, that they'd plan these dates, they'd block and tackle for it, they'd bring the babysitter, and they'd have great conversations, and they'd have real conversations, and they'd learn how they could better be there to support each other over the next month, and they'd celebrate each other, and they'd do all the things that these environments allow through the questions that they ask. And at the end of the day, you know, I think oftentimes we go into autopilot, and this is just one place to say, let's recalibrate. Let's look at this and see. And for her, she's like, our marriage just feels so much stronger because we were in a completely new phase and stage with 2 young kids, and we hadn't been there before. So for us to co-create what that looks like going forward, this gave them a really healthy framework to do that.
Yeah. The feeling that you described of like, oh, I don't really want to do this. It's going to feel like work. Sometimes that's how I feel like before I log on to a session with my therapist, where I'm like, I know this is going to be good, but it's going to be tough. And then I always leave feeling like, wow, I am so glad I talked to her today. So I think there are lots of ways in life that we can get that feeling. And sometimes work is tough, but it also is so beneficial on the other end.
Yeah, there's reward on the side of, you know, pain, meaning like grow through the things that are challenging. And there's obviously a difference between what is really hard and there isn't fruit on the other side, or it's your biological brain resistance telling you, no, this is actual fear that you need to protect yourself from. But then there's a part of our brain that's wired to just stay in the same neural pathways, to stay comfortable, to try and protect us from things doing its job, but it's actually keeping us safe in a way that's keeping us in our comfort zone, making us play small, not grow into the next evolution of who we're trying to become. And I think ultimately a lot of times relationships fail when you're not willing to grow together and you're not willing to have conversations that are both positive and sometimes challenging. And this creates, like I said, the space for that.
I love that. Thank you so much. We have a resource out that sort of recaps everything that we have done here today. It's a dive into what Tu B'Av is as a holiday. It looks at these questions, referencing that article from Forbes that Darrah put together. Here's a printed copy because I printed my version. But if you click on the link in our bio, it is the first resource that is listed there. And Darrah, I want to say thank you so much for taking time to not only share this, but to be so vulnerable to share about your relationship and what that learning and growth processes looked like for you. I really appreciate that. And I wish you and everyone who's here with us today a beautiful Tu B'Av.
Thank you. Thanks for hosting. Great to be with you.
Thank you all. Bye.